This is Robert Clotworthy, and you are listening to Oak Island Plus, a discussion of Oak Island and other mysteries from around the world. Here are your hosts, James McQuiston, Oak Island theorist and author, along with John Hamels, PhD and historical researcher. Get the whole story right here, brought to you by Rabbit Hole Investigations.
Hi everybody, I'm Doc Hamels and welcome back to Oak Island Plus. This is episode 6 and along with me as always is
Jim McQuiston, and we're so happy to announce that we have well over 11,000 views.
That's
for
pretty
our show.
Incredible.
Pretty proud of that, and we know it's going to continue to grow, and we're going to continue to broadcast.
Well, Jim, I think the things we've talked about are of interest to people, and we have stuck to our guns and told the history, and we haven't gotten sidetracked and treasure hunting and all that sort of thing.
Right, and one subject at a time,
right,
which is, I think, important to the whole. So, as a matter of fact, the subject for today is going to be the backstage of Oak Island, and most of the images you're going to see are images, unfortunately, I'm in a lot of them, but you're going to see things that you would never see on camera because they're photographs that I took there.
You know, folks, I said to Jim a while back, he's an awful humble guy. He's written 10 books on the subject. How many times you been on the island? 3 different times?
About 15 times on the island.
On the island. And you don't see much of him in the series anymore. And we thought, what a great opportunity for you all to see what it's like to be on the island while the new series is being promoted here in November, right? It's coming out.
Yeah.
And so this is going to give you a bird's eye view from a guy that walks the walk and talks the talk, and you have on the wall something special down there, and we'll get to that, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, Jim, you're an unsung hero in this whole story. No, really, I think you are, and I'm really proud to be working with you on this. So let's get into episode 6. So let's start your story with Nova Scotia and Oak Island.
Okay, well, the first slide that we're going to put up here, this is the familiar little elephant, Oak Island elephant. And in red, you can see I have Smith's Coves marked, and right below that is the trunk of the elephant. That's the sand spit called Isaac's Point. That's where the oak trees were planted there. And then the Money Pit Hill, which actually, they graded it all down. So it's like a parking lot, like a hard-packed gravel parking lot up there now. And then you go over to the swamp.
And we all are familiar with the swamp and the Money Pit, right? They've spent 10 years talking about those, plus all the other lots, throughout the island. How big is this island? Is it very big?
140 acres, I believe.
So it's really not very big, really.
And if you go to the far left, you'll see the causeway. That was put in, I believe, 1967. And right at the end of that causeway used to be the old war room. And that's the one that I first presented in, and I have a photo that kind of tells a little story about that. So the very next photo we're putting up here, this is me when I first arrived there, and I'm standing on the causeway, and the causeway now is lined with big rocks to protect it, but back then it was just scrub trees. But in the background you can see the old war room.
Jim, what year was that?
This was 2017.
So you've been at this for 6 years.
Well, I started in 2016 feeding them information, and then that's when they invited me up. And the right-hand photo there, that's a little grainy because I'm enlarging it so far. But you can see that right smack at the end of the causeway was the building, and so they'd be in there trying to film an episode, and they'd have all kinds of tourists come in and yapping and pulling their cars around, whatever, Probably saying, yay hoo, I finally got on Oak Island.
So this little war room that you call, was it very big?
It's as big as the other one. It was a tool shed originally, or a work room, and 3 of the reasons they had to move it was, number 1 was the tourists coming in, number 2 was it was never built for a crowd. It was built for a guy to work in, and number 3 didn't have like air conditioning or anything to protect all the artifacts they had on the wall.
Okay.
So they were getting concerned about it. So this very next photo shows how congested it got there. I hadn't talked to them yet at this point of what time they wanted me the next day, but off to the right you can see Alex Lagina, Dave Blankenship, and Peter Finelli. You can just barely see him, Frenetti.
All right.
And that's a Prometheus producer talking to them. And then you see Charles shaking hands with a couple of tourists.
I do.
But that's the end. That's right there. So that's where a car would have to turn around, just like that car's turning around.
So what you're saying, at that point, people could just drive on and...
Yeah. And
that always makes for good filming, doesn't it?
Right. And we know that from sometimes when they work on the street out in front of us, And the only other thing I'll point out here is that, two things. The little mess tent, you see that little blue mess tent?
I do.
That's just like a little backyard tent.
Like a pop-up.
But now, the last time I went up, they had a big, long pavilion almost, and they have a food wagon where they go get their food.
Oh, okay.
So it's changed dramatically. And I'll tell you a little anecdote about here is that this town tales out of school, but that's a lot about what this episode's about.
Absolutely.
Dave said to me, "Do you notice Charles limping?" And I said, "Yeah, what happened?" And he said, "Nothing. But every time Prometheus is always telling him, walk here, walk there, he gets tired of it. So whenever they're on the island, he limps. Yeah. And they leave the island and he quits limping."
So I think we need to explain one or two things here. So the Laginas own parts of the island.
Almost all of it. But
okay. And so for those who are watching right now, they always see this at the tail end, but Prometheus, who is Prometheus? What is it?
Well, it's a production company out of Los Angeles. They produce Ancient Aliens, Skinwalker Ranch,
right.
A Curse of Oak Island, Matty Blake's show. I think they produced that one that William Shatner does, The Unexplained.
Oh, yeah.
And other ones like that. Yeah. They're really great guys. They're really great. They've treated me really well, taking me up there.
So they're the camera folks, the production, the editing. Yeah. They're the ones that make the show for us to watch every week.
Right.
Okay.
And, if I say anything about them, I'm not being derogatory towards them. It's joking.
Okay.
But I have an NDA that I sign at the beginning of, from the day I get up there until that show is over for that season. And then after that, I can say whatever I want.
The teacher in me, NDA stands for what?
It's worthless. It's a non-disclosure agreement.
Okay,
but,
so you sign your life away for 3 months or whatever.
Right.
Okay.
And then mine's like $10,000 penalty. But I heard tell, and I can't prove this, but I heard tell that the main people have $1 million NDA. And you can imagine that, because if they found the Ark of the Covenant, let's say, and they went out and started telling everybody and bragging about it, there goes the show.
There goes the show.
So,
and the show.
They get really closed mouth towards the end of their filming and the beginning of the show. It's like radio silence from them, and I understand why.
Right.
They don't want to get
They don't want leaks, and nobody's going to watch the show if everybody knows what's going to happen.
So the very next photo... So they told me what time I was supposed to be there, and which was the next day. So I went down to this little town called Mahone Bay. That's on Mahone Bay, because Oak Island is within Mahone Bay. And this was right after Craig lost his son.
Oh yeah.
And he was just standing in this gift shop and just kind of staring straight ahead. And I was kind of reluctant to go in. I would have been reluctant even if that hadn't happened. But then I thought, well, he almost looks like he needs a friend. I'm going to go in there.
Sure.
So that's when I first met him, and I talked to him about being on the show. I was going to be in the war room the next day.
So this gift shop was for Oak Island?
No, it was just down to Mahone Bay. It's about maybe a 15 or 20 minute
So
drive.
the guys are in and out of the shops and
in fact, Jack Begley was in the next shop right over.
Oh, okay.
So I got to meet them. But the shop right next to that is the famous Mug and Anchor.
Okay.
And that's down in the lower right. You can see the table that they all sit at.
Oh yeah, they sort of have that after they have their war room meetings. A lot of times they have those meetings around the table, and they're all with their mugs.
And so the place isn't too much bigger than this. There's a few tables on the other side of that rail and a few on this side, but this is the big table.
Okay.
So they take over the big
Now,
table.
inquiring minds want to know, what is the green liquid in your mug? Looks green or yellow. What is that?
Bad coloring. That's beer. That's beer.
I thought it was St. Patrick's Day beer.
Yeah. But anyway, so you can see how photogenic that.
Yeah, look at all the different
bar is right there.
So this bar has been around for some time, it looks like.
Yeah, it's
okay.
So then let's just jump up to the next slide. So that night, they put me up at a place called it used to be called the Atlantica, but now it's called the Oak Island Resort. And they were, for a while, putting Gary Drayton up there, too. Now they got him his own place, I guess. But that first day I was there, I met Gary, and we were, you might call it, drinking buddies for quite a while.
I would say that, yes. Yeah, and you're both
several years in a row.
Quite a lot there.
And I'll tell you a real quick anecdote about him was that we were heading over the island one morning, and he was driving by, and I said, "Are you going to Oak Island?" He said, "No, I'm going to play Celebrity Walmart." And I said, "What is that?" And he says, "Well, I'm up here for like 3 months. I have to get stuff." I go down to Walmart. Every aisle I go in, somebody sees me and wants their photograph with me. And so he said, I call it Celebrity Walmart.
So since we've had Oak Island Plus, how many times have you been stopped in Walmart?
None. Oh. But I have been stopped. No, as a matter of fact, that's not true.
I knew it.
2 days ago, some older gentleman said, "You that guy from Oak Island?" Yep. So then through the years, I was in that lounge a lot with Gary, and we were in there one night, and if you look off to the right-hand side, this is Dennis Parada from Finders Keepers that's been on our show a couple of times where they had the cut stone and all that. And those are his two sons on either side of me. He's a policeman, and one of those two boys is a policeman. And they walked in, and Gary recognized them, so we went over. So here I'm sitting there with the two main treasure hunters in Nova Scotia, and I'm just being a sponge listening to them talk to each other.
Now, these folks are the ones that have gone off island and found some ruins?
Yes, up at the New Ross Foundation. Right. Now, there's only one... The way I understand it, there's only one treasure trove license in Nova Scotia, and that was granted to the Laginas. It's called the Oak Island Treasure Trove License. Okay. So these gentlemen have to use a mining license. Okay. But they're hunting for treasure, but they're using a mining license. And he claims he's found, they're calling them Templar tunnels right away, but he claims he's found tunnels all over up there at New Ross. He's been there 16 times working. Wow. And he also says that he has a series, like a documentary series. They're still in negotiations with Netflix or Hulu or somebody to publish it. So I'm just chomping at the bit. But we saw that little clip that he let us use, and we know they're doing it.
And I think a note here, to keep going back to our own episodes, is that the importance of these folks, they have found what we believe are ruins of the Alexander estate, that when they came over in the 1620s, they established their residence, and it had to do with the painting, had to do with the storyline, the things that were stolen from George Keith that we've talked about, right?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I sent him our last episode with the paintings. He said the gentleman that painted the image that looks like it's New Ross was 100% on.
Wow.
And he said there is no way any modern person would know that if they hadn't been these guys up there digging, finding what that guy painted back in 1634. That's pretty exciting.
Well, not to totally pat ourselves on the back, but I don't know of anyone in the world that has taken that painting anywhere, or even had it on television, YouTube, anywhere, and did what we did with it. And now we've got a treasure hunter that says, yeah, that's exactly, you guys are right. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. The thing was stored away. They didn't even, they had forgotten about it. And I only knew about it because it was written about in this book from the 1800s.
And going back to our story, it's Scottish.
Yeah.
There's, and we have conceded that there are probably layers of history upon layers of history, but our layer is from 16...
Well, basically 1628 to 1632.
Okay. So it's a pretty narrow stretch, but there's a story behind it.
The beauty of those those vignettes, is that we know they absolutely took place between 1628 and 1632, because that's the only period they were there. And we also know they absolutely took place below the 45th parallel, because that's as far as they could go.
So for those who are watching, if you missed our last episode, episode 5, that's the one we're talking about, and it's just chock full of information, and it's really a great show. So, Jim, let's go to the next picture, and let's talk about that one. It looks like a drilling rig of some sort.
Well, up in the top right, before they told me they wanted me to go meet Doug Kroll at COGS. Now, COGS is the Center for Geographic Sciences, and you may have remembered they went out on boats, on cog boats to dive. I think Doug wears a cog's hat quite often. And so they had this wonderful little library. It was just chock full of old books on Scotland and Nova Scotia.
Scotland, yeah.
And they had these maps that were in drawers. You had to take them out with kid gloves.
Oh,
we
boy.
weren't allowed to touch them, you know. So it was a real eye-opener. So I was there probably 4 or 5 hours with Doug on the day I met him, going through these books and all that.
Do you ever feel like you want to go back and relook at that stuff?
Yeah.
Can I go too?
Yeah. Let's all go.
Let's all go. Y'all want to go?
So
I'll take the crew.
the next day I came back to do my first war room ever. And before I did that, this producer in the black coat here, he said, I'm going to take you for a drive. So he took me up to the Mooney Pit area, and you can see how it's paved like a hard-packed driveway. And they had to do that because they had all these big rigs coming in.
I would think so.
And you see that barrel right in front of the drill rig? That's one of those first big canisters they took out.
Yeah.
Well, they realized that they'd run out of money pretty fast if they kept doing that, so they drilled 44 small holes. And so you can see right down at the bottom of that photo some of the red markers where they were going to drill.
Oh, I didn't even notice that. That's
One
right.
of those was H8, where they found the human bones,
Oh, boy.
and where they found the parchment and the book binding.
So you were
All that came
standing
up.
right there.
Yeah, I don't know which one was 8.
But I mean,
H8,
as you,
but I was
within
right
feet
there.
of all
Yeah.
that.
And one little bit of knowledge that I'm hoping is beyond the NDA by now is that they actually found more than 2. They found 6. But
They've only talked about 2.
I know, and I asked them, why don't we know more about the DNA of, you'd think that'd be like the number one thing. You'd want to know if they were Scottish or Portuguese or English or whatever. And I was told that they took a little bit of flack about it being a burial ground. And so they wanted to just let that go. And I think that's why they haven't just put a big canister down.
I understand
H8.
that. Yeah, that makes sense.
So then later on, down in the lower right, I met Laird, and he has a little corner office in that Blue Archive Center. And when he's not out, you only see him on the show every once in a while. But when he's not out being called to a discovery, he's on his computer logging everything in. So he's busy all the time. He's like,
So he's archiving the finds.
yeah,
and
digitally he's archiving the data and trying to verify what it is.
I've done some volunteer work at Gannon University, which is in Pennsylvania, and I understand this is painstaking work.
Yeah.
You just don't go to a big old hole, pull out a bunch of stuff, and throw it in a bag, and that's it. They measure it, they make drawings of it, they digitize it, and they give it a code number. So then later on, if you have to bring that up, say, hey, that nail that you found over there, that looks just like this nail over here. And are they connected in pottery and so on?
And I suggest that right early on, and they didn't answer, so they may have been already doing it. But I said, why not have a database of every single artifact found, the predicted date, the predicted source, the viability of it, is it authentic or does it look planted? Are you misreading it? Database that, because we know how databases work for our Oak Island Masonic conspiracy book. And then you could just go there and look for patterns and say, wow, look at, whatever, all these nails are used or whatever. And I don't know if they're doing that. That might be what Laird does.
No, he's an archaeologist by trade, right?
Yeah.
So, okay. Now, does he work independently, or does he work for university?
Well, he works principally for them, but he does do projects for the government.
Okay.
They'll get say the workmen are out and they accidentally dig up something.
Is he as deep a thinker as he appears?
Oh, yeah.
He doesn't say a lot, but he's always taking that object and flipping it around and thinking about it. So
he's a lot like Charles. They don't say a lot, but when they do, you better be listening. So, all right, well, let's flip to the next one. So this was the same day, and that I got to go see Samuel Ball's lot, and they didn't have a permit. The producer took me in there, and he said, don't get more than, I think it was 200 yards, you had to stay back, but you could see it there. And but we had to cross one of the walls that we did the big story on, I think our second episode, maybe.
right.
So I stood on one of those walls, climbing over it, And then he took me down to Smith's Cove. And off to the lower right, that's that plaque you see on the show at the beginning of the show that has the 6 men who died.
Oh, right.
That's engraved on there. I think, but I might be wrong, but I think that pile of stones right behind the producer there is marking off the G stone. And I always wonder why they leave that G stone there, because it's only going to get more worn from weather, you know. I would build a glass and cover, but that's where they dug that Smith's Cove all up, but this was before they ever dug down there.
Wow.
So
If we could look back to Samuel Ball,
Yeah.
he was an early settler in the 1700s, as I recall.
Yeah. And what's interesting about him is the first report of 3 men finding the money pit included him, and then the second report didn't include him. So it's been a mystery to everybody. Why would they change that? Maybe he didn't want anybody to know.
The interesting thing is he was a very wealthy man in the end, right?
Yeah. He needs his own show, his own study, but we'll get to it someday. So then it came time to do the show. So these photos on this slide right here are probably the last photos ever taken of the old war room.
Okay.
Because right after I gave my presentation, they took all the stuff off the wall, put it in the new war room.
Oh.
And what was funny was the lady was taking them off the wall. I just stuck my head back in there because I didn't figure I'd ever be there again. And I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "We're moving up to the new war room today." And then she zipped her lip. I said, "I understand." So I had to keep that quiet for a couple of years. But a couple things to notice here. One is this big black thing in the top.
Right.
That was a diffuser of the lighting, somewhat like we have here.
Right,
Only
yeah.
much rougher
huge.
looking, you know. But it would make it so the softer light would come down on everybody's face all the way around the table. And then I'm over on the right-hand side. That's just me. They told me where to sit, and I'm just getting my paperwork out.
Getting organized.
The gentleman behind me is getting my slideshow up.
So this is
on
your
that.
first time on the island?
First time.
Okay.
And this never got used, and it was a good presentation. It was as good as any of the other
Well,
ones.
of course it was.
Well, I mean, just, you know. So my thinking is it was the old war room. And the next presenter was in the new war room. And so they wouldn't want in the same TV season to show the old one and the new one, because people would start wondering what's going on there. But it was very interesting, and the one thing I'll say about it is the camera people. There were 2 or possibly 3, but I know 2 guys that had like big GoPros on their head, and they had these handles, and they would turn them side to side, up and down. The producer was in a trailer, and they had headphones, so he could say camera 2, turn to the right, and we wouldn't even know it. Right. And once we started, I never even knew those guys were in the room.
Become invisible.
You know, they were back in the darker background, you know, and doing all the filming. So that was that year, and I waited that whole season to see me on there, and it never came on. And I thought, must be I didn't impress them any. So they did ask me to come back. And I had written one book at this point. They had told me, or recommended I write that one. Then they recommended that I write a second one, because we were trading hundreds of emails, and it would just be gone. Yeah, imagine that. You and I trade 700 on one subject. You can imagine it. So they said everything's going to get lost if we don't do something with us. And I said, all right, I'll write the book. So they had me come up the next year. And this time was for the Oak Island 1632 book, because that's when I realized they were ousted in 1632.
That's right.
They took refuge in Mahone Bay, and I assumed that a ship had sunk there, and I was right, because Rick had me talk to a sea captain treasure hunter, and he told me approximately where the ship was, which was within sight of Oak Island. It was funny because he wouldn't tell them. He talked to them, and he wouldn't tell me when I met him. But then in the year of COVID, he just sent me an email out of the blue and said, I didn't know if he was afraid, you know, he'd be the last guy on earth to know where it was. So he just sent me this email with the basic directions of where the ship was. So
I didn't get copied on that, did I?
No, I wouldn't tell you. So So I sat on that for like a couple months because then I thought, well, I don't want to be the only one who knows.
Yeah.
So I wrote to Rick Lagina and I said, I'm telling you this in confidence.
Mm-hmm.
You do it with it what you want. So anyway, so I get to the war room, and it's the new war room. I'd never been there before, and there were only 2 trucks out front. And I'm like, well, wow, nobody showed up. I mean, 2 trucks, that maybe 4 guys, I don't know. I shook hands with Rick, that's the photo there. And within minutes of that, we walked through the door, and the whole table was full. And I said, wow, you brought the whole fam damly. And that's what they did, but the producer didn't. He said, whoa, Jim, you can't say that. Can we please ask you to just go out of the door and come back in? Don't say that. I said, yeah, sure. So that's the only time they ever told me what not to say, and they never, ever, in 20-some hours of filming, told me what to say.
Well.
So the people that complain that it's scripted are just plain wrong because, A, they'd have to have a big staff of writers, and then all these people would have to rehearse their lines all night long.
So when they're reacting to fines, those are real reactions.
Yeah. And, maybe somebody acts a little stiff in one, but that's the time that they found it, so, whatever.
It's real.
But it's not scripted. So I'll talk a little bit more about that war room in a minute, but the photo right next to it, that's one of my favorites. That's with Rick. The very next day, we went up to the New Ross Foundation because they had found that knighthood medallion, and Doug and I worked on identifying what it was. So this is Rick buying us lunch at a sub shop there, but what happened was there was one man that found it, and his cousin was with him. They were kids in the 70s, found it. They kept it quiet all these years. And the word finally leaked out to Doug. He got me involved. We identified what it was. So we thought we were going to meet them both up at the foundation. Only the cousin showed up.
Okay.
So we talked to him, and he says, at the very end, he says, well, maybe next week. And I said, well, it can't be next week because I'm leaving on Sunday. It's got to be tomorrow. And he said, well, I don't know. So that tomorrow was Saturday, all the film crew's all gone. And Doug calls me, he says, get over here quick, the guy's bringing the medallion. Wow. And so I went over there, and Rick's on the phone with Prometheus, trying to convince them to bring a crew, and they're not agreeing. So he hands me his phone. I've only seen the guy twice in my life, and he hands me the phone. He said, talk to him, Jim. So I tried to convince him, but the guy said, we can't get them enough together. So the only photos that exist of that meeting, that war room meeting, you're going to see them here in a minute.
Wow.
They were taken by us. So the next shot here is actually the war room. You can see my red flannel shirt. And the reason for that was when I was up there in 17, I wore a plain blue shirt, something like what you have on, and I blended into their background.
Oh, yeah.
So I thought, well, I don't wear lively colored shirts very often, but
my
red flannel shirt
jumps right out.
So I thought, well, it's cold up there, although they're not wearing long sleeves.
So, Jim, you're sitting there with everybody we watch every single week.
Yeah.
Wow.
I know, that's why I was so shocked when I came through the door. I'm like, the only people I never met was Fred Nolan or Dan Blankenship. Yeah, they were either sick at the time or Fred wasn't working with them yet for quite a while.
He was pretty elderly too.
Yeah, but Dan, the 2 times that I could have met Dan, he wasn't feeling well because I really wanted to.
Sure.
I mean, my gosh, he's a legend.
Pick his head.
He was there 50,
pick his brain.
50 years. So yeah, everybody was there and they were all congenial and listening intently. And so this very next picture is the other one of my favorite pictures.
That's a great shot.
Here you got Doug Kroll on one side of me, and you got Charles Barkhouse on the other side, and they're the 2 main historians of Oak Island.
So you're really and truly part of the history of the Curse of Oak Island.
Well, yeah, you could look at it that way.
That's the way I look at it.
One thing is I'm sure I'm going to be considered the most prolific writer because I've written...
well, you're the number 2 theorist now.
Yeah, number 2 theorist right now until next Tuesday.
We'll see what happens.
Next Tuesdays, they're going to have the top 10 theory again. I don't know if I'll be one of them, or maybe I'll be number 1, maybe I'll be number 12. But I'm sure we're both going to be watching it, and
Absolutely.
I'm going to have my iPhone ready to film it. DVR
it.
But yeah, it's so cool because I'm sitting there right with the top dogs, and they're just both so nice. Everybody is nice. But Charles taking me around on the island every year and showing me something. Every single year.
Great.
And Doug's worked on a lot of projects with me. So that's one of my faves. So here's a little promo. It's very short, but you'll recognize the Knights Templar.
Yep.
This was a little promo they did for the show, for that episode, which I get a kick out of it. So the very next day was the day that the gentleman said, well, no, this was actually 2 days later, because this was Saturday morning.
All right.
And I blocked out their faces because the man was very nervous.
Okay.
The guy that found the medallion.
Okay.
He had his friend who was a local historian. And in fact, Doug and Rick had to get a letter from the Nova Scotia government saying they wouldn't take this medallion away from him.
Holy mackerel.
And so Rick said, will you lead the meeting, Jim? So I said, well, if you show us the medallion and let us measure it and whatever, I'll tell you where I think it came from. Well, there was only 3 people that got the medallion that year, and I tracked down the other 2 medallions. Right. So it had to be this certain person. That's all in my Oak Island Nights book. So the very next shot is when he had given it to me, and I laid it on a piece of paper to take the only real good photo that's ever been taken of it that I know. Wow. It's been stolen off my website. I've seen it elsewhere now. But you can see how anxious Rick and Doug are just chomping at the bit to get...
Rick wants to jump right in there.
To get their hands on it. And then...
Now, this medallion, it was awarded to certain individuals by the king, yeah?
Yes, there were only 3. It was from 1671. There were only 3 of them. The other 2 were accounted for. This one belonged to Christopher Monk. Well, he was the financier of Sir William Phipps for the Concepcion treasure. And a lot of people think it was William Phipps that buried something on Oak Island. But I read Phipps' logs, and he said, we've been searching for treasure by land, by sea, and underground. So I think he was at the foundation searching for treasure, lost the medallion, and we projected why he might have lost it, because the bottom part of it is dented, like it got hit with a club. Right. And I think maybe it did, and it fell off him, fell in the dirt. He had to get out of there so he didn't get killed, and it laid there for 200 and some years until those boys found it.
So the king would award these various knighthoods or levels of earls or whatever, or for some meritorious achievement or something, and this was one of those types of medallions, right?
The key word is meritorious, because all other knighthoods were earned on merit, either in battle or some kind of service to the king. The Knights Baron of Nova Scotia that I talk about all the time was not. You paid your way in. You got 16,000 acres of land, but it was assumed that you were going to be in service of the king because you were going to help establish a real community. And in Nova Scotia, you had to also provide 6 men that were artisans, like a blacksmith or a home builder or whatever. So it was kind of like you pay the fee now and then you do the service, as opposed to most knights that won it on their merit.
Okay.
So, and nothing's come of that, except that at one point Rick asked me if I wanted to go to the British Museum to see the other twin that's there. There were 3 of them. The one got melted down in Sweden. The other one's at the British Museum, to compare. But we'd have to talk this shy person, protective person, into letting us take that medallion, or else we'd have to ask him to go too.
Wow.
So anyway, that war room, that's never been seen anywhere except in my book and in these photos right here. So I came back the next year, and I wore this very shirt I'm wearing right now.
There it is.
And on the left, you'll see that was one of the morning meetings. And at that point, you got your breakfast or lunch in that trailer right behind Rick and Charles. Now it's all expanded. But about 12 or so people, teams from both Prometheus and from Oak Island, got in a big circle, and the producer would say, okay, for instance, Gary and Rick want to go down to Smith's Cove, so Tom, Dick, and Harry, you go down with them, and Marty and Craig are going to go over to this museum, so
crews were assigned to follow the primary principal characters. Okay.
So then they would all get a donut or something, and then they'd all take off, So And the year before, Rick had asked me about that quote, a quote to put in the wall of the Interpreter Center. So this is me on the right, standing underneath it. And what I came up with, because I thought, well, I don't know exactly what the treasure is. I don't know exactly who did it or what time or whatever, but everybody's having fun doing it. So I didn't just say that, but I wrote, Oak Island is not so much a mystery to be solved as it is a chance to experience the unapologetic fascination of youth once again. Well, they absolutely loved it.
What did you feel like standing there? I mean, this must have been like
yeah.
one of those wow moments.
Yeah.
You know, the kid from Corey, Pennsylvania, standing, in Oak Island with your quote, your name, and author.
And now Northeast. You know.
I mean, wow.
And that is one of the questions I get when I go out and do talks is, I mean, it's implied, what's a podunk guy like you doing on that show, you know?
But that's the real world, right?
Yeah, and it just happened because I just sent them one thing about the Knights Baronet, and it all went from there. And they were pushing me for like the first 3 years. They were pushing me, what's this, what's this?
Yeah.
I'd say, I don't know, but I'll look into it, you know? So this very next set of photos, that day, Charles took me to see Nolan's Cross. And he used to take me in his golf cart, but there's no way you could get to Nolan's Cross in a golf cart. The road was all so mucky, so he had a four-wheeler. And this stone you see on the left, that's what they call the top stone, because typically they call it the headstone, but the middle stone of the cross has a face carved on it. So they said we'd get everybody confused if we were calling one the face stone and one the headstone. So he said we decided to just call that the top stone of the cross. Then he said there's another one down in the woods there if you'd like to go look at it. It's pretty mucky, but we went down in there, and it was a lot further than what this photo shows. We were down in there.
So Nolan's Cross is a series of a certain amount of large boulders placed in a particular manner, pointing to a particular direction that you've determined is...
Yes. Well, the cross arm points to the New Ross Foundation.
Okay.
And I'll tell you about that real quick, but in this photo, you can see all the little red flags.
I do.
Well, I don't know if you remember, I believe they called it seismic drilling. I think that's what they called it. But they, on the show, they never admitted, I guess you'd say, to more than about 30,000 of them. This very day these photos were taken, Charles told me they put 400,000 of those charges on every bit of land they owned.
Wait a minute. Well, how many?
400,000. And I double questioned him. I said, 400,000 or 40,000? He said, no, 400,000. He said, we covered every bit of land that we owned. So they were everywhere, as you can see from the photo. So when we left, as we were leaving here, I noticed his Masonic ring.
Yes.
And I said, wow, that is a beautiful ring. So he was showing it to me. And he said, and I also have this. And he pulled out a Knights Templar ring.
Oh, boy.
And he told me why he didn't wear it every day. But he said, it's in my pocket every day. And he was just smiling from ear to ear. And I said, you got to be the happiest guy in the world. And he said, why wouldn't I be? I hunt for buried treasure on a island all my life, every day of the week. And I'm like, okay, I got you. So we went on to the war room. You know, and I think they do these things to relax me, because you know, every year before the war room, they'll take me to show me something cool. You know, so I get in the war room this year. I'd already nailed down the William Alexander Al Strachan Nexus, and a few other people too.
The big robbery.
So I thought, rather than spread out to too much information, I'm just going to focus on how they were both connected to the Templars. They both were a big part of the Knights Baronet, and they both were a big part of the beginnings of Freemasonry.
Right.
And that nexus is actually Knights Templar, Knights Baronet, Freemasons. And that's subject of a lot of my books. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be speaking to a research lodge with 50 Masonic historians coming from all over the country, and that is the focus of my talk. Not Oak Island, not related to Oak Island, but related to that connection. So again, they were very open to it, and this got on the air too. So the very next year, I want to back up on what you're talking about, the cross. Well, everybody talks about where the long stem of the cross goes, and it's been to Washington, D.C., and some tower down in, I think, Massachusetts, Rosslyn Chapel, the Arc de Triomphe in France, the pyramids. It's like, where can this one...
Never ending.
But I was looking at one day, and I was looking at the cross arm. And I thought, wow, I wonder if... I just had this intuition that it went up to New Ross, so I got a Google map, and I plotted out where the cross was, and I sighted from the stone on one side right across it, like a rifle sight or a surveyor sight, not just one point to another, because you can do that anywhere in the world. And it went right up to the New Ross site. So I hurriedly sketched it out and sent it to them. Never heard anything. So I thought, well, maybe they just need to see a better sketch. So I did a much finer sketch, sent it to them. They didn't do anything. So I was helping Brian Farrell. You might remember he was on there. He was like an expert on Nolan's Cross. What was the shame for me was his book on it is much better than what the presentation was. Presentation left a lot to be imagined, where the book is pretty good. So I thought, well, I'm helping him, maybe he'll help me. So I said, this is my theory, can you check out? He's an architect in Ontario. Okay. So he did it all, and he came up with the same solution. So then I wrote them, and I said, you guys got to pay attention to this, because, you got 3 maps now showing it. So they had Steve Guptill.
Right. He's the guy with the pole.
Yeah. And
Surveyor.
We together contacted Tim and Alessandra that own the foundation.
Okay.
He asked them, please find a GPS point that you think represents pretty solidly the foundation, and let me know what it is. Then he went back and he sighted with his GPS right down the thing, and he came right up there too.
Wow.
So unbeknownst to me, this Erin Helton that was on there, she was a GIS expert.
Remember?
They actually asked her to verify it too. I didn't even know they did that. I found it out through the grapevine, and she verified it too. So now you have a GIS, GPS, and an architect all verified. So it has to mean something that it went. I mean, these are 2 historic points up there and 2 big mysteries, and they're connected by the layer that cross. Well, the other thing that we found out recently was that Oak Island, New Ross, and his main settlement at Port Royal were all just a hair below the 45th parallel.
Right.
And that's where his land ended. And so even though he claimed that he owned all of Nova Scotia, he only owned to the 45th parallel, and everything that shows any settlement in the early 1600s is right on that straight line, and that's right where that cross arm points. It's like it's a directional thing. Don't go beyond this. So I still don't know all the significance of it. I'd love to work with that Brian Farrell and say, okay, take this, what we've discovered, multiply in your years of study, and what is this? What's the big meaning behind this? So 2020 came, and I wrote 3 books in 2020. I don't know what that put me up to, but from me being on your show, that every time I wrote one, I said it was going to be the last one.
Many times you told me that.
Yeah. But something comes up.
Absolutely.
And in fact, something came up with that cross arm, because that's when I found that painting that showed the pictures that we knew had to be between 1628 and 1632, and had to be below that 45th parallel. So we knew where and when they had to have been painted.
There it was.
And so I found out more about the New Ross Foundation. So that's when I wrote Oak Island and New Ross, which is the first book that you began helping me with, trying to analyze that painting. What did it really mean? So
journey.
I went on and I wrote the Mayflower book, because I found out that a lot of people that were involved either with the Mayflower or Boston, which was 40 miles up from Plymouth, were the first settlers and the first searchers on Oak Island. I mean, I was amazed at how many of them were connected.
The family names were all the same. Yeah.
And I determined that virtually everyone, maybe not Sam Ball, but virtually everyone else was either connected with the Knights Baronet, connected with Freemasons, or connected with the Plymouth colony, and some of them were connected with all 3 of them.
Yeah.
So it really, this history that was taking place in the early 1600s was all related to Oak Island.
Nothing was isolated in this story, right?
Yeah.
All webbed in there.
And there was, other than Sandball, again, there was nobody else that was from any other diaspora than those three, you know. So they wanted me to talk to them about it, but we had to do it by Zoom because of COVID. And I call this my war Zoom meeting instead of war room. But what's funny about it was they sent me a GoPro to hook onto my Mac, and because they wanted to try to get it real crisp, and I wanted to make sure I had the right connectivity. So rather than using Wi-Fi, I ran a wire out the window and around back in another window and plugged right into my modem, so I'd have direct connect. And I spent like 2 weeks practicing, getting ready for it. We get ready to start filming, and they have trouble. And they're sitting there for 45 minutes solving their problem while I'm waiting there. I thought I was going to be the guy.
Oh, gosh, technology, you got to love it.
What happened during that 45 minutes was one of them left their mic on. Ooh. So for 45 minutes, I'm hearing all this private talk, and I'm not, you know, I mean, I'm not going to say, hey guys, I don't want to hear all the secrets, you know. So I actually filmed it on my iPhone, so I actually have that conversation on my iPhone. They did find something.
Do you film when we're talking?
No. I actually have a camera right over here filming us. So, but the other funny thing about it was, right in the beginning, I saw somebody, maybe Charles, I can't remember, but then when it finally tripped into film, the screen just had the words War Room on it. So I did the entire War Room, probably 2 hours, looking at the words War Room. And I didn't know who all was in there unless they spoke up.
Right.
That was the first meeting Marty was ever in. He, for some reason, didn't come to the other ones, but he was really impressed with the Mayflower book. And the fact that I could actually say this person, you know, went back to here. Right. You know, the chapels, the Mel Chapel. Okay, well, there was another boat that was supposed to go with the Mayflower, and it had a leak, and it had to go back to England. John Chapel bought that boat, and he was the ancestor of Mel Chapel and
again,
that family.
These were not isolated incidences. No, this was a movement in England and Scotland at the time, well, in other countries too, as we've already noted. People wanting to get a better life, getting out of Europe, getting out of the British Isles, you know, to find a new land. So, yeah.
Well, and William Alexander had actually, I'm paraphrasing him a little bit, but he actually made the comment, because the land is so desolate now, we're literally down to fishing or fighting to survive. Yeah. And they didn't want to live that way. And what a lot of people don't know, but it's in my Mayflower book, is that there was a petition to renew the Plymouth colony, and Sir Francis Bacon and our friend Thomas Howard were the first two signatures on that petition. Right. And William Alexander and his son became counselors for New England.
All the same players.
Those two got land all the way down to Manhattan. They owned Long Island, and a lot of the original deeds, some of the original deeds, go all the way back to the Alexanders. So they were big players trying to solve the problems of the old world by moving everything to the new world. So Maddie Blake was on Zoom, and Doug, of course, but a lot of this I didn't know until I saw the show, you know, and I had to take photos off the TV screen again. But it went well. But, and actually they showed, I was 3 times on the show, clips from this episode here, which surprised me because it was towards the end of the show. I thought I wasn't going to be on, then I'm on 1 week, and I'm like, okay, I was on. That's cool. The next week I'm on again. 2 weeks later I'm on again. I'm like, geez, you know, must be they enjoyed it. So that was 2020. That was the year of COVID, and I wrote 3 books during COVID. So then in 2022, or no, in 2021 they asked me to come up. Because of COVID, they had to have a stack of paper about that thick, and there were reference letters and all kinds of stuff. I had to get a test in the U.S., a test just as I crossed into Canada, and a test before I could get on the island. Wow. It was such a struggle to get there, and when I got there, I couldn't go anywhere. I was relegated to the hotel or Oak Island by the government. So I gave a presentation about my Mary Queen of Scots cipher codes, And then the next day I gave a presentation about that bag seal, that cloth, a lead seal for the bag cloth. And I have that traced to, I believe, to the woolen mill that manufactured it in Woolwich. And they didn't use anything.
No.
And I'm like, I struggled to get up there, and I gave them 2 good presentations, and they never used anything. So in 2022, I was at line in Sanders Market in Northeast with a cart full of groceries, and I get a phone call. It's Rick Lagina. And he said, Jim, this is Rick Lagina. Can you talk? And I said, well, wait a minute.
Hold it.
So I got out of line, and I went to where the greeting cards were, because there wasn't anybody in that aisle. And I talked to him, and he told me that there are people who want to only dig and drill, and they do not want to hear theorists. He's of the mind that, yeah, sure, we have to drill and dig, but we're going to find the story in the history. And in fact, in 2021, when I was up there, he did tell me a little bit of that, but he really made it clear in 2022. And he said, would you go to Scotland or Scotland and England with us if we went? I'm like, yeah, do cats wear climbing gear? And but when I was up there in 2021, which is my last slide here, I don't have a lot of photos from it, but that's the Money Pit Hill again on the left.
Still digging.
And it's still a gravel driveway, basically. And that's Mike Tedford. He's the main guy from Choice Drilling.
Right. You see him quite from time to time, yeah.
Charles took me up there, but then he went right over to the sorting table. So he's in the back on the sorting table, and Matheson is on the side. And these other 2 gentlemen are from Choice Drilling. So that's really the only photos I got from that year. There was quite a pall on the island, and I thought it had to do with COVID, because I didn't know what was going on. Well, it was right after the First Nations Mi'kmaq shutdown.
Right.
And so after my first war room, Rick kind of held me back as people were leaving, and he said, you probably noticed that everybody's kind of upset. And I said, yeah. And he said, in fact, Craig and Marty were so mad about the shutdown, they went back to Traverse City and left me here to figure this whole thing out. So he wasn't happy about that, and he ended up taking me over to his house, which I never even knew where he lived before, and he talked for like 3 hours, and I was like, he doesn't need to know my story. I want to know his story. Right. So literally, he told me all kinds of stuff about the island and about
like a sponge,
himself personally and whatever. And he indicated that it's not all fun and games on the island.
I would imagine.
And when you work together with people that long, and people have directions they want to go. So he reaffirmed that in 2022 when he said, I believe in the theorists and the history. Other people believe in digging and drilling. So, but nothing ever came of it, and I was disappointed. So then, again, they keep throwing a line to me to keep me hooked, but they don't reel me in, So in 2023, at the beginning of that, he called me again. We were talking, and he said, I know that we have ignored you theorists, particularly you. And he said, it's not my choice, and I apologize for it. If I could get them to bring you up again, would you come up? And same answer, of course. You would tell me the day and go. That never happened either. So my biggest joy of that year was when they announced the top 10, and I was the second place. I thought, well, at least they haven't forgotten me. They're just...
yeah, we were wondering.
So I don't know what the future holds as far as going up there anymore, but it's changed pretty dramatically. It was very open in the first year particularly, and then the second year fairly open too. Everything's tightened up. You can't go places unless Charles takes you. But he's taken me to everywhere. He took me to that Mi'kmaq dig, and it was gigantic. Well, they got shut down by the time the show came on. It was all bulldozed. He took me out to Isaac's Point, which I'd never been there before. He took me to Sam Ball's dig, and it's gigantic too. And they didn't get shut down there, so it's gigantic. So I don't know. The last year's focus was obviously on that old shaft, that old searcher shaft, and building it back down into the ground. And so I don't know what to expect. I watched the top 10 show last night about
Ancient
and
structures, I think it was called.
that didn't seem like it was changing directions much from last year.
Right.
But we don't know because 2 weeks from now the show starts.
Can't
And
wait. See what's going to happen.
by the way,
Yes.
if it works out, we're going to have Carmen Legg
Wouldn't that be cool?
in November, right around time the first show comes out.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed. And he said, "There's only certain things I can talk about." And I said, "Yeah, that's fine.
We'll take
There's
what-
going to be other
Take
things."
what we
yeah.
can get.
So that's the background
Right.
of Oak Island photos. Nobody else has done this that I know of.
Not me either.
Yeah, and so
Well,
review the show, and you can see what the background looks like. And
well, folks, that's a wrap for another episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did to go down through step-by-step Jim's journey with Oak Island, and you got to see and hear firsthand. This isn't, just somebody heard about, something. This is Jim's real adventure.
it was a real adventure.
Okay.
And I think it's going to continue.
Yeah.
I mean, they know we're pulling out really relevant information. And
Right.
at least Rick is probably
He's
paying
listening.
real close attention to all this.
Well, folks, we hope you enjoyed this particular episode. Please review the others and subscribe, like our website at Oak Island Plus, and also our Facebook page. I want to say always thanks to Jackie Phillips and Rand Nolbert, who are over here at Innovation Studios in Westfield, New York. Thanks for helping us out once again. Until next time, I'm Doc Hamels.
And Jim McQuiston. See you next month.
Bye-bye.
This is Robert Clotworthy, and you have been listening to Oak Island Plus, a discussion of Oak Island and other mysteries from around the world. Be sure to catch every episode.